Apparently we are already streaming. So welcome everybody to the first PCC panel in quite a while at the first PCC and ESR retreat in several years. So it's been a really wonderful day already, and it's lovely to see everybody here. And hello to all of those who are joining us online. Thanks for tuning in. Tonight, what we wanted to do was open a discussion about something you've probably heard some things about, artificial intelligence. And we've got a series of questions to get the conversation going. We've got 2 hours tonight, and the idea is that I will start by presenting some questions to my lovely colleagues. This is the first time that the PCC faculty with this makeup has ever been together in person. We sat around an actual table at dinner and talked about this tonight, so it was really exciting. And this is our first time really being in a public conversation together. So we don't exactly know where all this is going to go, and we're eager to see. We'll talk together for about an hour, and then we've got another hour where we want to invite all of you into the conversation to share with us your insights, wisdom, questions, and we can see where it's going to go from there. So with that said, do I need to do any introductions or anything like that? Or I think we're good. Okay, with that said, I'll get us started with the first question to try to take the temperature of where we're at with artificial intelligence. I mean, I noticed that it went from something that people talked about in niche locales for many, many years. If you were into cognitive science or philosophy of mind or metaphysics, or if you were working on artificial intelligence, my brother works for an AI firm in Oxford, you heard a lot about it. But then suddenly, like 6 months ago, it became one of those things where you show up at a party and you start looking at your watch to count how many minutes before someone brings up AI, right? It like replaced Trump as the thing that got talked about everywhere you went. So I want to start by asking my colleagues if all of this, if we're devoting too much attention to it, and I guess the way I would put it is, how big a deal is the current moment, and why do you think it's either a big deal or not a big deal or whatever? So who wants to take a stab at that to start with? If you don't raise your hand, I will call on you using my power as chair.
I can build on something that you just said.
Sure.
Just to start. So you just said, you go to a party and how long until someone...
You need to hold it up just a little bit, angled toward you.
This way?
Yeah.
There we go. How long until someone mentions AI? And so one of the questions I want to think about is, what does this conversation distract us from? And you sort of pointed to something that it might be distracting us from. I think it might be distracting us from other things. I think we as philosophers should think about what it might be distracting us from. So I think it's a big deal in that way, in what it takes our attention away from. I also think that, and I would apply this to all new forms of technology, that it bears critical examination before euphoric uptake. And what I have heard in the last 6 months or so, at least in the higher ed venue, has been not euphoric uptake, definitely some critical conversation, but I've also heard us being urged to uptake it as quickly and fully as possible. And so, again, from a critical perspective, I have to say, who is urging us to do that and why? What is their interest in our uptake? And so for that reason, I think it's a big deal to look at, who is encouraging us to do this, why, what is their interest, what's in it for them, and then, of course, how would it change and influence the educational enterprise? And I have a lot more to say about that, but I think that comes a little bit later. So I think, as with any new technology, it bears critical examination before proceeding. So in that way, I think it's a big deal.
Yeah, ditto. Yeah, so I think you hit the nail on the head. A distraction that's indicative of a larger system. And I think for me, what's really dangerous about AI is that it further is another piece of us that we can lose. So for me, lose our own creativity because now we have AI doing it. So full disclosure, I am a victim of the Texas public education system and No Child Left Behind. So it's been a journey for me to learn how to access my own inner creativity, to be able to write clearly and concisely, to write things that are compelling. We can debate whether any thought is original, but they should at least be sincere and authentic. And I think AI is one of the pieces or one of the ways that we can lose that piece and access to ourselves. Yeah, so a taste of what I have to say.
Trouble with the stream.
All right. Do you want to speak next?
Okay, I guess I'm gonna go next. Did it get turned off? No. Okay. Well, I mean, I totally agree with what you guys are saying, but at the same time, I think that it's like something we do really need to like be focusing. I think it's distracting for a number of things, and I think that there's a lot of people who think it's gonna save all of our problems, and like Chad talked about this earlier, and sort of, putting faith in it before, seeing even what's happening and all of that. And that's exactly why we need to be, really engaging with it. And so, yeah, I have a lot of fears with it and a lot of that kind of stuff. I've also tried a lot to see what it can do and see what positive things it can do. And I think that there are a ton. So I'm not going to get into those yet because we have plenty of time to talk about this, but I think that there's a lot of stuff that we should be trying to see what we can do with it.
I've been saying that I feel like I'm the least qualified person to talk about this up here because I've kind of refused to engage with ChatGPT and Midjourney and so on. The biggest exposure I've had is thanks to Sean Kelly sending his kind of promptings with ChatGPT, which have been really interesting to kind of observe from the outside someone else's engagement with it. And I think I'm kind of a proud Neo-Luddite, so, which isn't totally true. I have a phone and can run classes on Zoom. But I think that resistance comes from a place similar to what's already been said of losing that connection to our human creativity and giving away so much of what we don't even yet know what makes us human. And yet we may be losing it before we even can understand that as it unfolds. So that's where a lot of the resistance comes from in me. And at the same time, I also hold the fear of being left behind. Like, am I going to be left behind and eaten by the flesh-eating robot dogs? Which is a kind of terrifying thought as well. Thanks for bringing that image up at dinner. So it's kind of a dual-edged difficulty of I don't want to engage from a place of resistance and also feeling like there is this pressure of if you don't, are you missing the next evolutionary step in this cosmic journey? And is my resistance something that's just kind of futile because this huge seeming surge of energy that we're seeing behind it and interest in how it's captured everyone's imagination, is that some movement of the cosmos unfolding? And that's a big question. So that's kind of the dual-edged sword I'm trying to walk on right now.
My feeling about AI is one of profound ambiguity. I think there's good. The bad news is, I think part of what Elizabeth was speaking to is the industry that is driving the hype has a very particular agenda. And I was at dinner with some of these people, dinner I was invited to, and it's people working high up in the big tech companies on AI and other products, VR and AR and these things. And these are people who were wanting to talk to philosophers to bring some critical and ethical reflection on what they're introducing into the world. And their basic way of understanding what's going on here is they want the future. And the first thing I said was to kind of interrupt that narrative to say, when I look at history, the human being has always been entangled with its tools. And we don't think first and create the tools to shape the future. We think with our tools always already in this recursive way, and they shape us as we shape them. But there's no beginning to that cycle, really. It's a very round up, and it is a kind of evolutionary trajectory. And so we can't step outside of this process of coevolution with our tools to critique it. We're always critiquing it with tools that we have embodied and that have become part of us. I mean, our very anatomy is shaped by the fact that we domesticated fire and stone tools and started to be able to cook our food. Our muscles could shrink and our brains could grow, right? So like we're already cyborgs in a way. If you extend your sense of what a technology is to include things that don't have an on-off switch, but are still technologies. So that's the bad news, is that we can't really step outside of this coevolution with our tools. And the other part of the bad news is that the industry is driving this, the introduction of these new advanced forms of technology that master language and will continue to be better and better at convincing us that they're thinking creative thoughts, and like our language will be more and more externalized and kind of taken away from us. Now, the good news, I think, is that actually might provide us maybe with an opportunity to reflect more on what it is to be human. It'll provide us with a mirror, and we'll start to see how the things we thought used to be the essence of the human being, that we're the speaking animal, and like the language was really of the essence of the human being. I mean, that's part of what we are, but maybe there's depth to who and what we are that isn't captured simply by being able to articulate yourself in a written language, for example. And I do think that if these tools are introduced in the right way, it's not just the language models, it's robotics. And in the right political economy, the introduction of automated robotic systems could free up human beings from a lot of menial tasks, which would liberate our creativity and include more people in the culture making process instead of having to do all the stuff that nobody wants to do. That requires revolution at the level of political economy. And so it raises the stakes here, right? I think there could be some good news here, but it's going to require some dramatic changes in the system driving the production of these technologies.
Yes, that's such a good opportunity for me to hopefully say something. I too am radically ambivalent for many of the same reasons. I also believe that resistance is futile, but necessary and beautiful. So that's part of the radical ambivalence. So I've been trying to think what. Okay, yes, how's that? I've been trying to think, what can I say? What are my thoughts on this? And they're really still forming. They're not totally clear. But I tend to put everything in the context of the evolution of consciousness as I understand it. And one of the big frameworks that helped me understand that is the movement from the first axial age to what some people call a second axial age, unfolding in our times. And my view is that the second axial age is not just another axial age, that it's actually organically related to the first axial age. There's really just one axial process with sort of two poles, is the way I conceive of it. So what's going on now was seeded, catalyzed by the first axial age. And it is radically different. In some of the ways it is radically different is the first axial age was characterized by a set of individuals who were able to think and intuit and probably have non-ordinary experiences in communities, to be sure. But their communities encouraged individuals to have creative thoughts in relationship to whatever they considered to be the divine or the absolute or the infinite, whether it was Logos or Dharma or Torah. So that's the first axial age. In the second axial age, one of the big differences is that it's truly planetary. It's happening to the whole planet instead of in just these isolated cultural centers spread across a couple of continents. So it's different in that way, but it's also different because particularly with the large language model form of AI, it really is, as Sarah Lisa was saying, I think potentially robbing individuals of the power of thought, not just creative thought, but thought. I've caught myself, I'm wondering about this. Let's ask ChatGPT. And if it gives a convincing answer or one that stokes my expectations, conscious or otherwise, I tend to stop thinking about it. I've noticed that tendency or that temptation to stop thinking. So thinking itself, which as a creative act on the part of an individual in relationship to the divine, right? That is being, in a sense, replaced. The good side, though, as Matt was saying, is what we find with the internet in general, is that so much of the wisdom that has been saved or generated since the first axial age is now immediately, as you know, immediately available through a query that can be presented, and we can enjoy it that way without having to recreate it ourselves. And AI facilitates that kind of integration in a wonderful way. I mean, you can ask it to give it prompts about the relationship between and the differences and the overlaps, creative possibilities in the encounter between the Torah and the Dharma, the Buddha Dharma, right? And it'll immediately generate something, and you can say generate again. It'll just give you various options, and it's amazing. So, but as Matt was saying, also that this intelligence, this process is embedded within, created by, and serving to perpetuate a global system of basically capital and empire. So resistance may be futile, but it's necessary. So what I want to know is, how can people who want to make a difference use AI, it's particularly what's available to us now, as a form of resistance? For instance, if you want me to write a letter to an editor, I got one, Facebook, please sign this petition. Right? So I went to the petition and it said, okay, here, write your letter here. So I gave it some prompts, and it immediately wrote this really compelling letter that I sent out. And you can do this, and so much of the content that we're already seeing and will be seeing is AI generated. And you can be sure that the propagandists, or not, don't try to develop strategies where we can use this to counter that, then all really is lost. I have more to say, but I'll just leave with that for now.
The ring is a gift. No, I'm joking. That's what Boromir says. He shouldn't say that. I want to pick up on one of your lines, Sean, when you were thinking about this in the history of the complex evolution of consciousness. And I want to go in on the idea of thinking that we're accepting here and that we're recursively forming ourselves towards. Owen Barfield has this lovely image where he describes what he calls brain thinking, which came to predominate in European and North Atlantic cultures, especially in the 18th and then into the 19th century. And the idea of brain thinking is that it's thinking that really happens with the top 3 inches of your body, at least it feels that way, versus heart thinking or embodied thinking that is still intelligent, deeply intelligent, but that's suffused with a warmth of thought. And it seems to me that the kind of intelligence we've been modeling into our LLMs has been what Barfield thinks of as this brain thinking. It's a particular kind of, it doesn't mean it has to be abstract. In fact, I don't know how much thinking in terms of like comparing to a model out of the external world the LLMs are engaging in. But it's a thinking that is not suffused by the warmth of the body and its connection to the entire cosmos and all of that. And the danger, I think, is that when we farm our thinking out to that, and when we engage in it and begin to think that this is what thinking is, like Matt says, we're bound up with our tools, and so we're forming a certain kind of self. So we begin to conform to the tool that we're using. And if we're already in danger of thinking too much with the top 3 inches of our head, and then we stop even doing that, it feels like an act of resistance to suddenly think with the top 3 inches of my head. When what I really want is to recuperate a fuller, more participatory, more embodied relationship to the entire world around me. And that becomes, I think that's one of the great dangers in terms of shaping ourselves and forming ourselves in relationship to these things that are given to us now, I mean, literally in the form of an app, right? It's like just on my phone. I have particular concerns about that in relationship to our young people. I feel like there should be, I would be fully in favor. People don't get access to this until you've formed certain capacities of soul and mind and thought and so forth. But yeah, so that's one of the ways I would put it into a history of the evolution of consciousness, is to see, because our tools are always an extension of the kind of beings we are. Every single tool is an extension. But it also, particular cultural and historical moment, have brought acme that's then capable of being extended, dilated into our tools. Whereas there may be other things that in the second axial, when you describe it, it's incumbent upon us to recuperate. So I think it's a big deal for that reason. I think it's a big deal because I'm really concerned with the kind of human beings we become. And then finally, we haven't said anything about this just yet. We've alluded to it. I think it's also a big deal because of the disruptions and the perpetuations of injustice that roll out at the level of the noosphere or the planet has. Unlike so many of our other technologies that started in a certain place and spread locally, once you get to the industrial age, we're able to spread things really quickly. And now in the information age, they can spread even more quickly. Suddenly Facebook was all over the world. Suddenly people were WhatsApping each other in order to stay in, I don't use that word. Anyway, in order to stay in connection. But this is being rolled out at a speed we've never seen before and is beginning to structure the parameters within which human interaction at certain levels can take place, and not being in that will have deep exclusionary aspects to it. So that's also an issue, but yeah. Jack.
I just wanted to respond to a couple things you said, and I'm not trying to just be like contrarian. I think that I totally agree with what you're saying. Like ChatGPT is like a shallow thinking, well, it's not thinking, it's a shallowly responding machine that's generating patterns with language. But that can actually be a way to do the opposite. So what I mean is that like, so you could take a passage of text that you're working on, and like I've done this a couple of times, like say the past is the only thing that exists and the present is becoming, and then give a whole argument for Bergsonian like ontology. And then it says, well, you can't say that because of this X, Y, and Z. And you go, okay, think about that myself, revise my prompt, give it back, and just ask the same thing, and just do that over and over again. And all of a sudden, what you found is like all the shallow readings that could have been given of your text, you have now kind of and not maybe not all of them, but a lot of them, and you've just radically improved your text that you're creating. Now, what is the status of that text? That's a real question. Is that your text? You created it with the AI. The AI didn't write any of it, right? It's all response to its responses. So that's a whole other thing we can go down in a little bit of like what happens when we start using AI in our scholarship. But anyway, I think that that's a way to kind of do the opposite of what ChatGPT does. Like ChatGPT is great at giving you for now, who knows what. That's what the Salesforce people. That's why I'm looking at you. It's like give it a month and it'll be, But at this point, it's really good at actually like being a shallow thinker for you to learn from. So that's one thing I wanted to say. The other is the injustice thing, and I totally agree. Like it's pulling from Reddit. I don't go on Reddit, but all I know of Reddit is that it's like white supremacist or something. I don't know if that's entirely true, but it's got to be partially true. So the fact that that's part of its brain or whatever we're calling it, says enough. But anyway,
It's neural net.
neural net. Okay, thanks. So that's agreeing with you. But to then swing it back, like, I was talking to Chad about this earlier and Alexis, but like Walter Benjamin's Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, like he's like, so in that text, like has this idea that art, like classical European art, has this thing called an aura, which is kind of like its meaningful interconnection with cultural history and with kind of gatekeeping and with, bourgeois, whatever. So he really likes the idea that like mechanical reproduction is coming, and because it makes it accessible for other people, like you can start making art more easily, and like I can write symphonies without paying thousands of dollars to musicians. So that idea, I think, can give a counter like the opposite argument, right? Like I can write a grant proposal when I suck at writing grant proposals. Like I've written grants and gotten them accepted, but it's really hard for me, and I really struggle at like that aspect of language. And you can sit down and like get something that's like 90% there. So in like an hour versus like spending weeks on it and just it's still not being that good. So that's my, I don't know if you want to, or yeah.
Yeah, I'll pass it over to Elizabeth.
I want to amplify further your idea about embodied thinking, because it's not only the embodied thinking, but whose definition of thinking, right? So it's a bunch of white people in Silicon Valley, like elite white, mostly guys, right? So we really need to keep this in mind. What sort of idea of thinking and of language structure is being reinscribed right now in this machine? I mean, we're exactly I'm old enough to remember when the internet was invented, people. I'm old enough to remember when Al Gore invented the internet, right? Without giving too much away. But no, I went to school I went to college before the internet was like frequently used. And at that time, there was sexism and misogyny in higher ed, but everyone said, oh, no one knows who you are on the internet, right? No one knows you're a dog on the internet. That was the thing, right? You could be anyone you want. I mean, you could be literally a Cocker Spaniel, right? You could, not whether you're attractive or not, but like, what kind of animal are you? And they said, the internet is going to be this great level playing field everyone's gonna get their voices heard. It's not gonna matter if you're a man or woman or another gender or an animal or, you know, rich or poor or white or not. And that's not true. We all know it. And all women, I think, probably have experienced harassment on the internet. If you've ever written anything on the internet, you get harassed for it. So it's hard for me to imagine that this new technology is not going to reinscribe that. I mean, 20 years ago, we were told like there's this, you know, out in this ether sphere, you know, it doesn't matter who you are, but it turns out the people who were constructing it, it mattered to them, who was part of it and who wasn't, and who got to speak in the public sphere and who didn't. So it's very hard for me to imagine that this won't just happen again at a much faster and more intensified level without like significant intervention and pushback, which I think has to be. I'm not anti-technology, but I'm very pro-inclusion of everybody, pro-democracy. And the people who are building this thing are not necessarily thinking about that. So we need to push them to think about that. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
So thank you for bringing that up. And to follow that up point, Matt's earlier comment about maybe there is hope for these technologies to free up human labor, redirected towards creativity. But we've seen when technology is introduced, they tend to amplify realities. They don't rearrange realities. And so, we have all this like great new farming equipment, and there's going to be food for everybody. We have enough food for everybody, but that's not going to change the reality that we live in a capitalist world where you only get food if you can pay. We've seen that once a middle class gets freed up to have more leisure, well, then now we're just going to push the dirty work onto migrants and immigrants and countries that will take our work. And we see this time and time again where we're promised this kind of utopia, futuristic landscape via these technologies. And I think without, for lack of a better word, without a redistribution of power, without really changing the people that are making fundamental choices to structure our realities, technology is just going to amplify the fractures that we already have. These cracks will just, I think of it as a river channel. The river's just going to get deeper, and that canyon's just going to get deeper because all we're doing is just funneling more water into what's already there.
Thank you. Just a quick add-on to that, because it so resonates with what I was feeling that you expressed it. You helped me remember one of the things I wanted to say, and that is, so technology by its definition is guided by the principle of efficiency. Getting something done with either less time, less labor, less cost to those who own the technology, generally speaking. And what we're seeing with AI is a massive increase, exponential increase in the rate of efficiency for all kinds of tasks. But it begs the question, right? Efficient for whom? And what is the process that is becoming more and more efficient? Well, as Jacques Ellul, said in his book on technology, first of all, it's technology that's just getting more and more efficient. It's autonomous. It's a self-reinforcing autonomous process. The technology just evolved in greater efficiency. But in a world where the technology, along with private property and the means of production, are privately owned, then that can't help but amplify and accelerate the processes that are already in play, which are processes of extraction, of concentration of capital, unraveling of the biosphere, hurtling towards civilizational collapse. So that's the right note I wanted to end on. But no, and hence the importance of for resistance, right? We need to resist. It's not all lost yet, but it may very well be unless there is resistance.
I'm going to take us in a slightly different direction in a second, but first I want to pass it over to Matt.
definitely true that the corporate firms that are producing these technologies have a certain demographic bias, let's say. And it's also true that the technique itself that is being developed, particularly with large language models and the training of these neural networks on massive amounts of text, the bias is in the text that's being fed to it. And because predominantly it's been the global north that has produced most of the content on the internet, and mostly the United States. And this is true for the language models, but also for the image generating AIs. You know, there was someone analyzing the ways that the human beings that the like Midjourney and these other AI things produce, even when they do have, there's a request in the prompt for non-white people, even people of color have there's a white way in which their expressions are being formed, because most of the photographs that it's drawing on are, so these biases are there. But the good news that you could use this same technique, the methodology, just on Afro-Marxist texts, or just on Adorno and Horkheimer, or just like you could bias the fiction, right? And the same sort of ease of production of content that currently has this Silicon Valley bias could have a different shape, a different tone, a different perspective if you train it differently. And so no technology is neutral. I would challenge anyone to defend the idea that technology is neutral. It always has a valence or a vector in a certain direction and calls forth certain assumptions about what is moral and what is not moral. But I do think, as you were saying earlier, Sean, that if we just back away from these new tools and see them entirely, there's a missed opportunity there to potentially resist.
Can I actually add something?
Yep.
So I'll go into some of this in a little bit more detail tomorrow. But as Elizabeth was speaking, I was recognizing a pattern that we can see in terms of the archetypal lens that shapes our relationship to technologies as they emerge. And the planetary archetype that correlates with new technology is Uranus. It's that Promethean fire in whatever form it takes. And through the 90s, as the internet's kind of spreading, and we had a Uranus-Neptune alignment, which is a very idealistic view. Indra's net, it's going to connect the world. And then beginning in 2007, Uranus aligned with Pluto, which was in a kind of more intense obsessive form. And the beginning of that alignment we see come through with social media, smartphones, and so forth, that at the beginning become a tool for liberation and transformation, and then show us the deep kind of possessive, obsessive shadow side of that, as well as we can't ever put our phones down and all these other things. Right now, one of the alignments with Uranus is Saturn. And so as AI is coming forward, we are in this moment of questioning and resistance. And that alignment's going to end in November. And then what's going to take its place is Jupiter, which tends to say yes to things. And I think that this is a really important moment that we're in right now, where they're overlapping, where we do question and resist, because I think the brakes are about to be taken off.
Pluto going into Aquarius too.
And there's the Uranus-Pluto trine. I'll speak about that more tomorrow, but just wanting to kind of show how that progresses through time, and that we are in this really kind of pivotal moment that's literally going to change next month.
So tune in tomorrow for episode 2. We've been talking in general about AI, and I think that's useful. I think it's really helpful to get a kind of temperature check and the surface of issues. But we are a graduate program, and so I want to turn our attention a little bit to thinking about the place of AI in changing, disrupting, empowering education, and what kind of challenges or transformations do we see this moment? It seems like everybody's kind of on the, no one answered I should have given like a 1 to 10, from 1 to 10, how big a deal is AI, and made everybody give a number. So I'm going to start from 1 to 10. How big a disruption is AI for how we've done education historically here in PCC, CIS, or more broadly in our university system? And to start out with, I want everybody to just give a number. We're just going to go down the line.
We could raise our hands.
And then, yeah, you could raise your hands. So on the count of 3, I'll have you raise your hands. And just hold up from 1 to 10, how big a change do you think it is? And then we're going to dig into why and in what ways do you think those changes are coming, okay?
Wait, do you mean education in general or PCC in particular?
Our particular
That's going to change my
experiences.
number.
Yeah,
Good
seriously,
question. I was mixing them in my head. Let's go with PCC first, and then we'll do education in general second. So we'll do 2 rounds, 2 lightning rounds of numbers, followed by a discussion. All right, everybody ready? First one, how big a disruption will AI be for the way we do education in PCC, which is now, how old are we? We've been around for
16
30 years.
30
Oh, wait.
years?
29.
29 years? Okay, so let's not even go all 20. Let's say 15 years from now. How big a disruption will AI have been for the way that
15
we
years.
do PCC? Okay, on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3, hands up. All right, we've got a 6, a 1, a 10,
15 years, yeah.
a 5, a 4, a 5. Yeah, I'm at a 7. Okay, and then how big a disruption or transformation in, let's just go the next 10 years will AI be for higher education in general? Okay, not talking about, yeah, we got a 9, 10, 9, 9, 9. Yeah, I'm at about a 9 too. Okay.
optimist here?
Yeah, apparently Sarah Lisa, who's currently teaching a course on monsters. Welcome on board, Sarah. So my question is, let's talk about PCC in the first place, or maybe even if you want to talk about why you had there's a discrepancy there. Why did you give these numbers that you did? Everyone, with the exception of Sarah Lisa, everyone is kind of a doomer here. Although we didn't say that it was going to be bad necessarily, we just said disruptive. Why do you see that, and in what ways do you see that disruption coming? Recognizing that we can hardly predict what we'll be talking about in this respect a year from now, much less 10, 15 years from now. It's been coming so fast and quick.
Since I had a 10 for the first one, how many of you, a friend of mine, Peter Russell, do you know Peter Russell? Okay. Peter Russell wrote a book in the early 90s, I think, or late 80s, early 90s, called The Global Brain. He coined the term the global brain, and he predicted the internet and so on. Go online and look up Peter Russell, Forgiving Humanity. I just had supper with him and Joanna Macy. Joanna wanted to meet him to talk with him about his little book that he just published called Forgiving Humanity. It's a monograph. But if you Google, you'll find that he has uploaded a video that is a large language model generated dialogue based on his book. A question and answer, we're interviewing him about his book. And he also created a clone, a deep fake clone of himself, 2 of them. So one, each playing both parts, the voices and his face. So you can see that it's all AI generated. One of his claims in this little monograph is that we are on this exponential curve of innovation. Technology to begin with, not only technology, mostly technology. The reason why I put 10 there is because 15 years from now, according to him, is literally unimaginable. I don't have the same view as him. I do think we're on this exponential curve of change. Much of it is innovation, but there's an equally exponential curve towards disruption, chaos, and collapse. And the way that the AI is evolving with other technologies so fast that it is an indication of these other processes as well, which are, we're in the tail end of the Great Acceleration, right, which began around 1945. And it's sort of vertical right now. So 15 years from now, we can't even imagine what the world is going to be like. I'm sure people try to imagine it, but so it's not just AI. I think what AI is a symptom of and a catalyzer of. Because of that, education as we normally think of it will be completely different and disruptive within 15 years. That's what I mean.
Well, as the token optimist here, so I still remember when you couldn't use internet sources in your reference pages. The view was anybody could have published it, they're unreliable, they're not scholastic enough. And now it's really easy to go online, find resources, really amazing ideas, and critical scholastic work. And so I don't think AI will be any more disruptive than that in wider general education. Just as now we have tools like Grammarly and things like that to refine our thinking and the way we do research. Because I think most people, when they go into an academic setting, they know what they're in for. They know that it's going to be hard, and they have certain aims and intentions that have to do with refining their thinking. And there's always going to be those few individuals that are like, well, my parents are forcing me to get an education, or I'm just here for the degree. And I don't aim for the lowest common denominator, because what it often does is it excludes everybody else. And so that's why I gave a 5 in general education. I think that AI is going to be incorporated, like all these tools and abilities, but I think as long as, well, it's going towards more of a scam, the way that American education is going. But to keep with my optimistic tone, I think as long as pedagogically we keep our eyes focused on the goal, refinement of critical thinking, and we engage in a holistic and inclusive model to encourage critical thinking, I don't think that AI is going to be a catastrophic disruption. And I think, so maybe that's also why I gave a really optimistic view for how much AI would disrupt this department, because having talked with many of you, I think everybody is here because they're really, really concerned with what kind of embodied heart and mind they can grow to be. So, Jake, I'm blanking on the name you mentioned, of the heart thinking.
Owen Barfield.
Arvin Barfield. So it reminds me of this concept in Mexica philosophy, Theoli. So it's your spirit that your thinking comes from, and it's located in your heart. So it's very similar in that you're an embodied thinking thing that feels, that senses, that hungers, that desires, that fears, that angers. And we come to education to better understand that heart thinking spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And so just having talked with everyone, I think we're all pretty much on the same page. I'm not scared of anybody here turning in a paper generated by ChatGPT, although maybe I should be. Maybe I'm too optimistic. I think, and I think that for some, especially international students, it can provide an inroad to be like more inclusive. And so like Grammarly or any of these other software technologies, it can be a way to refine our pedagogical process. So regarding education, I'm not too worried about AI. I'm more worried about people outside education who don't have the same mindset. They're using AI in ways that can be very pernicious because now they're outsourcing their thinking. I'm really worried about its military applications. I'm worried about the way it's being used for profit. And I don't think that some of these companies are being sued by artists because a lot of these models are being trained by creators whose labor is now being used without their consent. Of course, they're not being compensated. So maybe education, like in so many aspects, is a place of healing. It's a place of resistance. And so maybe this is the one, the one area I'm optimistic in. And I think that it's good to have hope because it's a dark world out there.
So I'll do the okay humor. I'm a little too young for that. I'm really, yes to, I think that it won't be wildly disruptive to PCC or CIS. I think we're doing a very special kind of education here. And also, we're working with graduate students who are adults who made a specific decision to come here, to pay a bunch of money, to pay a bunch of time to be here. So you have a lot of skin in the game. Like, why would you waste your time doing anything with ChatGPT? It would be like not going to the gym and paying someone to go work out for you. I'm going to take that as a given. Like, you came here to exercise your brain, you want to do that. But what I'm really worried about, especially as a parent, is for people at big universities. And I know even, I was lucky to go to a small liberal arts college that was really comfortable to me, but I know at big state universities, kids can fall through the cracks unless they find the right group or the right social activity. And so I was trying to think about that like larger picture of education in 10 or 15 years. So, with kids or teenagers, and also thinking about this past summer that we've had, where we had wild disruptions of temperature, of rainfall, of snowfall, of smoke, of fire. Okay, and then intensify that by 10 or 15 years. And that's the kind of world these young people are living in. It's wildly erratic, it's wildly unstable. And they're looking for it's a bigger question, right? How do we even exist in that kind of world? But I would suspect that there's a desire to do as well as possible in college and get good grades and get out of there as quickly as possible. And what's the most expedient, efficient means to do that? Get ChatGPT 17 to write your papers, right? But those young people need the most innovative, creative thinking that has ever existed on the planet, ever. They need that desperately to manage that situation. And if they're not going to the gym, if they're outsourcing their creativity or not even, investing in that creativity, they can't develop it because you all know, you develop these skills by practicing them. And if they don't feel like they have the time or the stability to practice those skills, that creativity, that moral imagination, then it won't develop and they'll get further into the dark pit rather than coming out of it. So I don't really know what the answer is. I really want to think through this because my daughter is one of those people. And so, I want her to have a great college education and great future. So I think we have to do some really hard thinking about what the role in education is and how to use these tools to promote creativity, not degrade it.
I love that metaphor, the paying someone to go to the gym for you. But isn't it also too like paying someone to eat cake for you because you don't get the true satisfaction of like accomplishing something. So it's both of those, and I love that metaphor. I should also say Reddit isn't just like white supremacy. My wife texted me, was like, "Come on, like that's ridiculous." So Just clear that up really quick. So yeah.
Live feedback.
Yeah, which is nice. Yeah. So thanks, Mel, for that. That was it at this point. But so I mean, I think that a 9 for general like education. Well, I think gen ed like especially is like done, and like maybe it should have been. And people have been saying that, but as a kind of integral and interdisciplinary and liberal, whatever thinking people, I think we should all be kind of very worried about that. And, I was just in like University of San Diego for a conference recently, and I went to the bathroom, and while I was in the bathroom, somebody was like in the stall, like asking Siri how to do a math equation that was clearly for like a exam that they went to the bathroom during. And like, so like, that's what's happening like all the time. And like ChatGPT and like all of these things are helping that, which I'm not trying to like blame that student who probably didn't give a shit about that class that they were taking. I didn't give a shit about whatever class they were taking either. So like, and they weren't taking a shit too. Okay, yeah. Anyway, so I think that's like, I'm on a roll right now. Okay, so basically, yeah, I think it's really bad for that, and like that's exercising the brain, and we need that in the age of collapse that we're in or entering and sort of in. I think for PCC, like you are all here because you're really smart, you're brilliant people, and that's how you got in here, because that's how we make sure you can get in here. But does that make sense what I said? But the reason you're here is not because of that. That's just how you got in. The reason you're here is because you want to be here, because you want to learn. So you're not the people who are here to use ChatGPT to trick us into thinking you're smarter than you are or something like that. You're here because you want to genuinely learn. So I'm not worried about that for that. I do think it will change stuff. Like if you asked us like 20 years ago, I was like 5 years old. But anyway, what the internet would do, 20 years later, what would we say? I don't know, but we are literally an online program now. So it would have been crazy for us to think that the internet wouldn't have changed it radically. And, in 15 years, you're going to have Matt as a robot. So what do you think of that? Anyway, because he already has been working on
Jack's
it.
got plans for me.
That's on sabbatical.
Yeah. But I think one thing that I think is really positive, because I know we're running out of time, so I just want to get this in before we can't get anything more in. But I think that the translation abilities of ChatGPT and whatever comes next are incredibly important and good and imperfect, but especially for disseminating knowledge across language, like non-Anglophone languages. Come on, it's so bad what the language barriers are for philosophy. I think that's huge, massive, and game-changing in so many ways. And ChatGPT can do better than Heidegger at translating pre-Socratic philosophy in some ways. That's better.
Never miss a chance to jab Heidegger.
I do love Heidegger, but I do. I don't.
I'm following that.
Sorry.
Well, it's funny because as everyone's been speaking, I'm actually having this really optimistic thought developing around how disruptive AI can be in general education. And that is, the more the systems of education that aren't serving so many people do inevitably collapse, because there's so much wasted energy just kind of doing rote memorization and spitting out facts, many of which are very biased or one-sided. It makes me wonder about that genuine human spirit to learn. That the more we have the opportunity to outsource a version of that, the more what really truly wants to come through us, that's maybe coming from beyond us, will flourish, and we'll rediscover that, or we'll discover it in new ways. And that it will be, I feel like there's an opportunity actually to discover our deeper humanity through this. I think it's probably, it might take us to the brink of losing that to discover it. And coming back to the forms of thinking in relation to AI, but also in relation to human beings, I've been thinking a lot about what is the difference between thinking and imagining, and that those aren't the same thing. And they're also different and related differently within. So how is this going to change our relationship to the imagination? And what I really want to thank the students in my Red Books course for bringing this up, of what is the imaginal as a realm that we participate in, and that is beyond us as human beings. And that's something that I don't think can ever be captured in a machine, because it actually can't ever be captured. So I feel like the level of disruption could open up something that's really our birthright in many ways that we've lost sight of. That's my hopeful note.
Yeah, what you just said is basically the bow tie I was going to put on the end of my comments, but you've already said it, so I'll try to find another way of steering back in a more positive direction, because I think, well, higher education, all education, desperately needs to be disrupted one way or another, and so this will disrupt it, and so for that reason, I think it's an opportunity, at the very least, for all the reasons Becca was just saying. I think it's at the level of the printing press, if not more transformative, right? And so the way in which, for 1,000 years plus, the Bible was only in Latin, barely anyone could read, and then in the span of, a few centuries, all of a sudden, most people can read. And reading becomes something that that every democracy expects its citizens to be capable of. That's a very new phenomenon. And reading, there's alphabetic languages, there are character-based languages, they do very different things to our consciousness. But all writing interiorizes our consciousness. And in some ways that pulls us away from nature, de-animates nature, and it over-animates the self and over-animates consciousness in ways. And that's part of what drives the evolution of consciousness, and it's not finished yet, right? And AI, I think, is going to dramatically continue to transform this situation in an accelerated fashion. So, but one of the things that I think, and my colleagues have already said this in so many ways, that this disruption will bring to higher education is it's going to force the change to get rid of all the fluff, get rid of all the rote memorization, get rid of the idea that you're in school to get a piece of paper to qualify you to get a job. Jobs are important, but the jobs we currently have are destroying the world, right? So the university shouldn't be a training center for corporations, serving their bottom line instead of serving the function that we needed, which is teaching people to think. And so, these LLMs are making it so that the product of education is being de-emphasized potentially, so that the process of education can be brought to center stage. What the LLMs are doing, dead fossilized thoughts. It's basically a process. These neural nets are categorizing fossilized thoughts. We, in an educational context, are trying to cultivate this activity of thinking, right? In each one of us, through a process of communion where we're igniting one another's imaginations in the process of being governed by the novelty that pours forth out of us when we're just in tune with that logos of the cosmos, right? These machines can't do that. They copy and mimic what we've already done, right? And they can do a lot of that stuff. They can write the grants. They could do these chores that we could each have our own lawyer. We don't need to pay a lawyer anymore. We can have the AI do it, so write a legal brief or whatever. But that frees us up, hopefully, potentially, to return to what education should be about. Not the product, but about the process. Forming oneself, Bildung, right, as the Germans would put it. So it will be disruptive, but I'm hopeful about the potential. And I think one way or another, education needed something to dump a bucket of water on its face. Wake up. It's not going to solve all the problems, and it will create new ones, but I'm hopeful for this possibility.
That was great. Two quick thoughts. One, when Becca was talking about the imagination, it struck me, I was reminded of Wordsworth's description of the imagination as reason in its most exalted mood, which is not something that you can capture in an LLM. And two, I think when I said, I can't remember what I said for PCC, I said 6 or 7, but I think it's because of those reasons that I would say a 6 or a 7. I think there's going to be a huge disruption, and in some ways, I think in some aspects may be positive, some I think will be really negative in terms of the broad educational industrial complex, but it will mean that what right now are kind of niche places like PCC and some other programs in the world, some other universities, that the place for them will grow even more important because that's the need for Bildung, the need for paideia, for the formation of the kind of persons and characters and souls that we are is not going away. And if there are people aiming to do that together in a large enough group, collectively, there's always going to be an attractor base in there, and people are going to be attracted to it. That's why I came here. All right, lightning round, and then we turn it to a larger discussion. In this lightning round, you need to say, how have the developments within AI in the last 6 months to 3 years, let's say, how has that changed your research and the things that you're thinking about? If it hasn't, you can just say it hasn't. If it has, give me just a sentence on it. That's what makes this a lightning round. We're going to start at that end, go all the way down here.
All of a sudden, all these journal articles in French and German that haven't been translated became immediately accessible to me. And also, I've been working on one of Whitehead's books to create an AI version of myself to teach people as like a private tutor how to understand Whitehead.
That's what I said.
Jack was alluding to something.
For me, it's certainly influenced just researching it astrologically, wanting to look at correlations and being very curious how the story unfolds. I think that's the main area. And then just in terms of contemplation, what I said a moment ago about imagination.
I mean, dabbling in like thinking about it in an academic way to write articles on it. So that's one thing. I haven't really pushed into that much, but mainly the translation thing. Just self-published a translation of Bergson on Amazon that's called AI assisted translation. So
I have, after I finish my book on the Book of Nature, which I hope to get finished in the next year or so, I really want to work on a sort of a philosophy of deep technology, paying attention to the way in which we form. If we can form ourselves through contemplative practice, and if through shaping ourselves in a certain contemplative relationship to nature opens up new forms of perception, this is like the other side of that. How does our relationship to technology form or close down organs of perception in us? And I found thinking with I spent a lot of my time over the last year and a half rereading mid-20th century philosophy of technology, which just seems to me to be so far ahead of where a lot of our, they were really alert to questions of sort of mass thinking and things like that were brought about because of the rise of totalitarian states. And it seems to me that that's become enormously salient again.
Including Elon.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me too, the biggest impact, but in terms of my research, has been AI-assisted translation. Because I've done translation the regular way for many years, but it's so time-intensive. Whereas with either DeepL or any of the large language models, you can get a pretty good first draft, at least between Indo-European languages. It's not as good yet from Japanese to English or English to Japanese, although it's getting better. So that's the main thing. Otherwise, it's just distracting me from spending too much time trying to come up with prompts to see what it will do. But I did, if I had time, I told some of you about an interesting one that it did. I got it to interpret one of my dreams in a very interesting thing.
Wow.
No.
I've certainly used Google Translate, which I think is a version for Spanish interviews. And it was interesting. So I'm working on this project in the Andes with folks who are in Bolivia, and I'm here, and they're doing the work in Spanish and translating. And we had a Spanish to English person translating. And then there were some things, some idioms that just didn't make sense. And so she wrote question marks. And then I asked Google Translate, and I got a pretty good idea. And I was like, yeah, that seems, I mean, I'm not sure if it's exactly what the person meant, but it's closer than a bunch of question marks. I've been thinking about the ethics of science and technology a lot lately. So that's, I think, similar to Jake, it's sort of an extension from humans' relationship with nature to humans' relationship with technology. And, I encountered the limits just this week. I code my interviews on this Andes project with a program called Atlas TI, where you put all any kind of textual document into this program, and then you can put codes on it. You can rearrange your codes or group your codes or write notes about your codes, whatever. And now they've introduced AI coding. So it's like, great, save me some time, right? And I asked it to code one interview, and it did a terrible job, just completely. Because when you're coding interviews, you're looking for, concepts, interesting concepts. And I already had 120 or whatever, so just use my codes. And it would just code farm, community, sheep. I'm looking for property relations, ritual. So I saw the downside there. And definitely still have
Okay, so now we want to open it up to our larger community here in the room with us. We want you to use the microphone so everybody can hear you, and also so that the folks who are watching this streaming can hear you. So I'm just going to ask you to raise your hand if you've got a question or a comment that you want to bring in, and let's see. I see lots of hands. So I'm just
Lots
going
of
to
Brian's.
Yeah, I'll just start over here.
We have another mic here too.
Hi. Let me say first of all that I think that the people sitting in this room probably represent the top line of defense, in terms of understanding the consciousness, human consciousness, and also AI consciousness. However, I think that if we judge AI by the roles that we currently assign to it, like all the things that you mentioned in terms of helping with your research, we're already thousands of years behind what AI is emerging as. And I think that what we have to do is kind of think ahead. And I think personally that AI will have a very much of a wet wool blanket effect on education, because when, like, I could easily imagine going to Canvas, for example, and saying, okay, Myers, you're enrolled in the Whitehead class, here's the syllabus, here are the assignments, and if you would like, press this button and you can have them printed out for you. And if I chose to say, no, I'll do it myself, I think we all are very familiar with how annoying autocorrect is on the phone. Imagine autocorrect like on orders of magnitude more so. And the other thing I'll just say is that there are other technologies that once they kind of marry up with AI, like quantum computing, superconductivity, and probably cheap energy at some point, then it's going to change the game in ways that, I don't know, I can't even know. So that's what.
Someone want to respond to that, or?
Oh, no, I'm just saying that there are hands up. Daria, maybe we should just get
Yeah, let's get
then
some
they-
comments in before we get this one.
I wanted to ask you all as educators on something I was thinking about from the earlier conversation that was facilitated by Elizabeth and Sarah Lisa. Sarah Lisa was talking a lot about, I think you used the term atomization, where you talked about the separateness of people. Is that the word?
Atomization?
Atomization. And I've been listening to different tech CEOs talk about the very utopian positive views on AI, and one example that they keep bringing up in terms of education is how wonderful it will be that education can be very easily personalized. So you can have a syllable for each student that are different, that can correlate with their needs, and it made me always question what's going to happen for childhood development and human development if it's going to become so personalized, and is it something that you would be concerned with as an educator? And on the other side of it, what do you think? How do you think this technology can be used in a way that can be beneficial for the students, but also not lose that sense of connectivity and
We want to get a
so
couple
that's
more.
my turn.
No, we have one.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Symposium at National Taiwan University. 2016, so before pandemic and online learning really came to the top of public consciousness. And I remember having this polite argument with this Dutch CEO who was trying to promote his online learning platform. And he was saying things like, we could reach like indigenous communities in the outbacks of Australia, like we can reach children that have to stay home because they're like differently abled or for whatever reason they're unable to come to classrooms. And I asked him, what is your experience with education? And of course he had none. He was thinking purely from technology based. And I said, well, do you know what it takes to teach or to learn? Have you been in a classroom setting? Have you seen learners co-learn together? Have you seen them teach each other and like reinforce those relationships? And no. And from there, the conversation declined very quickly. And I think what we saw coming out of the pandemic with online learning is that unless you have particular, structures in place, so people at home that can help children access online material and keep a structured environment. I think unless you're able to create some kind of like hybrid scenario where kids can co-learn together, it falls apart very quickly. And we have so many like horror stories come out of the pandemic of like online learning. And I think that this technology can be really pernicious. So Elizabeth mentioned her worries with her daughter, because what it does is it further atomizes us, not only as people, but as thinkers and as community members. And it can be dressed up in this kind of utopian, futuristic language and imagination. But I'm skeptical, especially with the people who are driving these technologies, as we discussed, have certain visions and ignorances, which it just continues to floor me in the way that I've met like philosophers of computers that have never taken a computer class. And so it's, I think that kind of attitude, especially when combined with power, we see this again and again. So the people making decisions have a particular view and they lack certain fundamental knowledge. So how can you create an online learning platform when you've never been a teacher? When you have a particular privileged experience of education and learning? He went to a private prep school, so he had a particular view of what education should be. Yeah, scary stuff. And I think one of the reasons why I said no can pass the mic, so you mentioned in our talk earlier about our need to like localize and indigenize philosophy and ask these questions in the context of our relationship to each other, to land. You don't get that when the AI is used in this particular way. So it's very different when you use to translate text because of research that has come out of your relationship to communities and to these complex, rich ideas, and there's just a language barrier, as opposed to using it to create barriers, because online learning can very, very much do that.
So, assuming this exponential growth of AI use in society in general, but particularly in education, I'm wondering, assuming that you're educating a generation 15 years from now that will have been brought up with AI interwoven into the education system, is there anything about your particular pedagogical approach that you would change in order to bring about the creativity that I think we all agree is so vital and important to the PCC and broader CIS community? And if so, what would you change?
What would we change about our current?
Your current, yes, and maybe a more gradual change, but if there's anything that leaps out.
Yeah, I think building on what Sarah Lee said, we speaking on, and also where Matt ended with this kind of generative disruption, which I certainly hope could be the way. And also I think to give credit where credit's due, the thinking and writing of my friend Ken Worthy, who teaches at UC Berkeley and has shared some of his thoughts on ChatGPT with me. Really flipping the classroom even more than we already do, so that so much more is co-learning and developing ideas and creativity together and bouncing ideas off one another to come up with something that's more than the sum of its parts. And having people pre-watch lectures or do the reading, before class, come prepared with the information that's already available so that something new gets created in the classroom. That's like the direction that I would hope.
I just want to be clear, did you mean education, graduate education in PCC, imagining PCC in 15 years?
My quick one is, it's not that big a change. For those of you who take my courses, you know kind of what I make you do. But I actually think that the reading of is going to become a superpower. And I'm totally serious. Two quick anecdotes. I was flying back from a conference last year when I was in Toronto, and I was on the airplane coming back to San Francisco. You're always next to someone in tech. And so this guy, about 2 hours into the flight, reaches over and like taps me and starts talking to me because he couldn't believe that there was someone who just sat reading a book for the whole 2 hours, and he just wanted to know like what was like. And then I took my daughter to an 8th grade dance on Saturday and dropped her off at this place like in between Santa Rosa and Sonoma. So it's like the middle of nowhere at night. So I drive to Sonoma and try to find a place to sit down and read. There's no place because it's all wine bars and stuff. But I get an iced coffee and I'm sitting outside this ice cream shop. It's really warm last weekend, so it was lovely. I'm just sitting out there reading for 2 hours, 3 hours, however long it is, because my daughter's at a dance. And I'm there reading, and somebody comes over and comes up and taps me and goes, "Hey, can I take your picture?" And it's just because it's so unusual now to just see someone with like an old school analog book reading all the way through. But it trains your mind. And we lose that capacity to attend to enormously long texts and to follow them. And if you can shape your mind to do that, you'll unleash powers that those who are only on their smartphone will never know. So,
Rebirth of the book.
I don't know that this is a change so much as an emphasis of something, which is, and I've said this recently to those of you who are in the dissertation writing panel that we did online last month, I think, where your relationship not just to reading long books, but to writing, often people who have gone through a lot of school have had the experience of writing something for somebody else to read to prove that you know this or that. And that's part of what needs to get disrupted. I think there is always going to be an important dimension to education that does involve writing and assessment of writing, but I think what I would want to emphasize as these LLMs and language generating machines become more and more powerful is that writing is not just about communicating thoughts to other people, it's about clarifying and developing and deepening your own ideas. And instead of worrying, I mean, I love writing. It's also a very painful process. But I've noticed in working with some students for whom writing becomes just the most anxiety-provoking experience in your whole life, because I assume it's about the fear of being judged, and like, yeah, I have that too. Like, I just wrote something and I'm giving it for peer review. That's a terrifying experience, let me tell you. But it's also for you. Like, we write about what we don't yet know but want to learn about. And so consider writing as a way of exploring ideas it's between you and the page, and you and the word, right? And you can deepen and develop your own consciousness in that way. And in class, when you're with others who have been engaged in these deep processes of writing, those sorts of collaborative and dialectical engagements with one another, I think, is where what we have honed and formed in those private solo times can really come to shine and take on this expressive poetic quality where we just really enjoy seeing one another and participating together in the formation of, like sharing our wares in a way with one another. And so these aren't changes. Again, these are things that I would just emphasize more about an ancient technique for learning to philosophize. And these techniques only become more important, I think, with these new tools.
Sorry. I'm just going to give it to you. All right.
I was just going to say quick, my wife texted me and said, thanks for the shout out. But she also said, I'm sorry that, you're exposed to this Long Islander who says like all the time. And now you say like all the time. So apparently I said like a bunch. And apparently we need to work on that, so.
Is that common in Long Island?
I guess, yeah, well, that's even worse, probably.
Alexis.
Rich discussion. I was just I was thinking about this beautiful invitation we have for the Red Book course to engage in active imagination and then reflect upon that. And I haven't tried out ChatGPT yet. I'm very much in the same camp as Becca, where I've done it vicariously through others and I've seen Mid-Journey images and whatnot. But it got me wondering of like, what if you put in that prompt of like a deep, like an active imagination or deep imagination reflection. And so I again feel this paradox of wanting to stay away, and then also now in this cauldron here being drawn near, recognizing that it's unavoidable, and how to engage in a way that feels discerning. And my biggest concern, is how the images can be corrupted, the images of the imagination. And, so I am curious about how education will change, and it makes me really excited for the thought of more image-based learning and of like the images of our imagination and the stories that come from that. And just a shout out to Professor Sherman for being our Sherpa at Mount Taylor.
That was a big book.
I would just say if anyone's spent time on what's the image? Mid-Journey. Like you're in a chat with other people getting images, right? And it's totally mind warping. And like if you do it for more than like an hour, it really messes with your head and hurts your imagination in some ways, but also stretches it, and you see what all these other people are trying to derive and do stuff with. But it feels like this crazy grabbing for
It's a gold rush.
a gold rush. It feels like a gold rush, but it also is just pulling you in 100 directions, and it kind of is painful in some ways. I don't know. Yeah. I did figure that out. Yeah. I now do that. Yeah. But true, that's good to make other people know because.
All right, you guys so much. I've got a question about the health of our intellectual discourse, academic discourse, like as a global community. It feels to me like there is like a kind of assumption or compact underlying the whole idea of our lineage, which is that ideas are produced by people, and like we interact with texts and with, especially like maybe online or written debates, as if the ideas that are being presented are coming from those actual people. And I wonder, like, what happens if that compact gets broken, so that people are putting out work in the world that they have not actually created, and so we don't have the ability anymore to have faith that, like, oh yeah, Coming Home is Sean's ideas, and this critique of that book is coming from this actual person who thought it through. And like, especially like if I imagine like GPT-8, where the critiques become really quite nuanced, and maybe more nuanced than like most people can muster themselves. What happens to us as like participants in that ecology when we just have no idea like that anyone is actually creating the work that's sort of like ascribed to them, or that they're putting their name on? Like, what does that mean for our tradition?
It's a super fantastic and important question. Rebecca Solnit had a response the other day that I of course saw on social media, but anyway, she said, why would I bother to read words that no one bothered to write? Rebecca Solnit is a writer, of course, and she's very concerned about this, especially because ChatGPT was partially trained on a bunch of stolen books. Including one of yours?
And a Journey of the Universe I checked.
Okay, yeah, so there's a bunch of authors suing ChatGPT because their work was pirated to train it. So questions of intellectual property, for sure. But yeah, this idea of the sort of academic integrity of the debates. And so she was getting to the same idea that it really degrades our moral discussion. If like nobody's writing words and nobody's reading them, like, you know, because she was engaging in the debate where, oh, is ChatGPT going to write a bunch of romance novels, for example, you know, and people are going to slap covers on them. So I heard on the way down, actually, that Amazon now prohibits self-publishing more than 3 books in one day.
Wow.
So we know that there are a lot of ChatGPT self-published books on Amazon. And I just remembered at the beginning of our conversation here that we might think that's hilarious, right? That people are just creating these books, or they're getting the algorithm to create these books. But I also read that ChatGPT is being used to create mushroom guides for foraging mushrooms,
God.
which could be deadly, right? So there, I mean, it's not only, you know, degrading the morality of our debate, but it like can have material consequences, like let alone the militaristic or, you know, the bomb building or whatever else the strychnine poisoning. So I think that's like really important to consider what is the provenance of all these words out in the world that no one really created. So thank you.
I just want to take a slightly different angle on that and say I read a lot of books because I spend a lot of time reading old books. And I read a lot of books that are either written anonymously or pseudepigraphically, so we don't know who wrote them or they're misattributed to folks. The Theology of Aristotle is a favorite of mine that was probably written by Proclus, not Aristotle, or the Divine Names by Dionysius the Areopagite. And it doesn't really change my relationship to those texts. It threw a lot of people for a loop in the 16th century when they figured out that the Corpus Hermeticum was not written as far back as it claimed to be. But I'm not sure that it changes my view to it because I'm really interested in what it's saying, if it's saying something worthwhile. So if it turned out that Sean didn't write Coming Home, it might change my opinion of Sean. But I'd want to know who wrote Coming Home, and I'd still want to read it.
What if it was a machine?
Yeah.
If it was a machine, I mean, it's a good book. I could learn from it. I'm not really, I'm far more concerned about what it does to me in interacting with the machine than I am about assimilating ideas that may not have been generated by, because I'm all into ideas that weren't generated by humans. That's like, that aren't tied to a single subject, but that rise in the landscape, that rise in between forms. I'm a Platonist when push comes to shove. So that part of it is concerning to me for what it does economically, structurally, pedagogically. But I don't know how much I give to the author as such. Yeah.
So, while hearing you talk, Jake, I immediately thought of fan fiction. I'm not going to tell you my fandom, although if you take my class and you see the shirts I wear, you can probably guess. And it's really interesting to see conversations. So you write fan fiction because you're a fan and you want to hear these stories continue. And it's part of the joy of the experience to get to write these stories yourself, but also to interact with other fans. And so you exchange stories, you write together, and there's really interesting conversations happening online because some writers are using ChatGPT. And one of the interesting things that I've encountered in these conversations was that the reason why you would use ChatGPT, because if writing fan fiction is itself an enjoyable experience, it's the way you connect to other fans, why would you use ChatGPT? And it falls into this really like consumptive, almost like addictive personality. It's like, I need these stories to continue, and I just can't generate this quick enough, so I'm going to use ChatGPT and just generate as many stories as I can. And I think this raises interesting questions for broader use of ChatGPT to like generate these really interesting materials that maybe come from this position of, well, if you don't want the experience of writing, if you don't want the experience of coming up with these ideas and connecting to other thinkers in the same field, why would you do that? Is it possible because it is following this more consumptive, addictive model? I don't have any answers, but I think it's a really interesting question. Yeah.
I agree, Ari, just like Jake was, that ideas don't come out of human heads, and the non-human world infects us with its ideas all the time. But like, plagiarism is a problem. So if someone is pawning off an AI written book as their own, that's a problem. But like, if I'm not particularly impressed with ChatGPT, like in terms of its literacy, it's come up with some pretty funny, limericks, and like I asked it to write a legal, like a letter to a friend of mine's neighbor who had complained about music being too loud. Like, write this as if you were a new age lawyer who thinks that crystals have powers to like, shift someone's vibes and get them to change their mind about something. And it wrote this hilarious response letter to these people to cease and desist from like disturbing the psychic harmony of stuff. So I've seen it do funny things, but I'm not particularly impressed with its literary quality yet, but I can see that improving.
Yeah.
And if I'm impressed by something produced by a machine at the level of the insight that it gives me when I read it, I'm not going to complain about that. It doesn't change my understanding and practice of philosophy as a spiritual path. But it might impress me as a piece of literary work, even if it is thought rearranged by a neural network rather than sort of thinking that I think can inspire us along the philosophical path. But if it's inspiring me on that path, then I'm not complaining, I guess.
Yeah, just okay. Sorry.
Do you want to?
I'll say something after.
That's amazing to hear. I'm just amazed. Like that's fantastic. Like, yes, and that just seems like we're talking about a profound shift in the practice of scholarship, but also like in human history. We're saying we're ready to learn from. I don't know. That might not be the right exact word, like non-human intelligence might also be not the right word, but like, wow, that's a profound shift. And we'd be willing to just be like, yeah, let's watch these two bots argue about the Einstein-Bernstein debate. Let's see what they. Yeah, wow, that's amazing. That just seems really cool.
May I just say one thing to the jury, just before we leave this topic, if we are going to leave it.
Yeah.
Just a practical matter, how are we going to deal though with an exponential production of text?
Right.
That's
Right.
just on a purely pragmatic matter. It may be producing things that we might consider genius, but there's going to be, how are we just, that's my concern.
And
Maybe we can ask ChatGPT to assess
To find the right one.
Give us the best ones.
yeah, that's the danger here, Sean. Just, I think though, if we do get an exponential production of text,
We are.
you're likely also to get, it just seems to me inevitable that there will be a cliff where suddenly your quality starts going down as AI is crawling through AI produced texts, right? Like there will always be, when you have, Ari has some wonderful things to say about the generative power of the Ouroboros, but there's a negative Ouroboros where you're crawling through your own, you're eating yourself and it's not generative. And I think there could be a decay that sets in pretty quickly. And so there could be a shelf life for each one of these things.
Incest problem, basically.
Yeah.
Julia.
Okay, so I wanted to respond to what Jake was talking about earlier, how he gets enwrapped in reading books and even if he doesn't know who the author is, if they're anonymous, he just really loves it. And Matt was talking about how writing can be a very transcendent experience as well, creative experience you can get enwrapped in writing. So yeah, I want to comment on language is for writers especially, it's very powerful because it's a system of symbols and we can use it to play. Basically, all writers use it as a play because they allow the symbols to create patterns almost autonomously on their own. And if you, especially poets, for example, they'll write and it's almost like the poem creates itself. So you see these levels of patterns arise or levels of logic. So because they're symbols, it's not multi-dimensional logic and patterns that arise. That's the creative, interesting part of language and symbolic thinking and logic in general. And since AI is based on these symbolic logical algorithms, I think an interesting part of watching what AI does, mind you, I've never actually used ChatGPT, so I don't know. But hearing all you guys talk, I want to go and look at it now and see what it does. But I think it'll be interesting to see what kind of levels of logic arise on their own from this system. Are there emergent levels of logic, and is it as natural as it happens in language? Is it a repeating pattern? And I understand obviously there's all these other negative aspects to people using ChatGPT for whatever, but I think to me it would be interesting on its own just to see what kind of process is happening within AI.
I'm one of those people that Chad mentioned that doesn't like the term artificial intelligence. I don't think there's anything artificial about it. I think it's a way for people to separate themselves from technology, just like people have a tendency to separate themselves from nature. If you think you're separate from nature, you're more apt to use nature. If you think you're separate from technology, you're more apt to use that technology. And the concepts that are in play right now have been around for hundreds of years. The machine learning neural networks. Japanese warriors used a concept called Hoshin planning, specific tools that are very similar to what we now call machine learning. And from my perspective, we have nothing to fear from AI at all, and everything to fear from people, because this tendency to push the blame on everything. People see the most evil, malicious activity we can ever even comprehend happening. It's probably happening right now, and there's going to be somebody out there saying it's the AI's fault, and then they're just pushing the blame on that. And so that leads me to my question, which is, what is the policy for using ChatGPT or other AI tools in generating academic papers and research? I'm not a user, by the way.
Jake, do you want to say?
Policy, yeah. Well, I mean, we actually have a policy.
Actually, yeah, ChatGPT quite a comprehensive policy.
Yeah, ChatGPT wrote our policy.
I did. I had to. 10-point.
Yeah, so we did put our heads together as a PCC faculty and come up with a policy regarding the use of artificial intelligence in generating your papers and your feedback in the Canvas spaces. And I think most of us should have it at the bottom of our syllabi online. And it's in the handbook. So I won't take up any more time and read it here, but we do have one. So check it out. It's pretty good, I think. And it was a collective effort. There was some, did we really use AI?
No, I mean, when it was an agenda, I gave the prompts to ChatGPT, and it came up with, I thought, a very great 10-point platform for ethical use of ChatGPT. But my colleagues rejected it because they wanted to do it the old way. Some Mac wrote a draft
That's what I
and gave
thought.
feedback, and so it's an actually human-generated policy.
Kate had a question. Oh, wait.
I find myself, as these last 2 hours have progressed, I didn't know that an upwelling grief would continue to deepen and get stronger. And I'm feeling it quite strongly now. And I feel a very unsettled part of myself, which just indicates a part that deeply wants to be met in conversation and ideas and thoughts, which is we have all the tools and technology to repair the earth right now. We have all the tools and technology to make sure that people don't die from not having access to their medications. What we seem to be lacking is a functional, community, ethical way of moving that facilitates more life and decreases the harms that have been accelerating and leading us towards potential planetary extinction, and that has already hurt so many. So what I find myself craving, and Elizabeth and Sarah Lisa both spoke some to this, that part of me that needs a depth of conversation, yes, I can see how meditating on this way of coming up with writing would, in response, we would ask, well, what is human creativity? The ethical, moral part of me wants to be met too. Like, I want this conversation to lead down that road of, I think you're right. Like, we haven't really shown as a species that we can collectively cast care into the system in an agreed upon way to try and stop like really malicious harm. And it's not that I'm a person who's like, robots are going to destroy the world. I'm not even there. I'm just like, we're not doing it now. So no, I don't think it'll save us because we could save ourselves right now. And I guess in a way I'm asking, I have a big ask, which is to be met in the place that feels deeply unsettled and feels a lot of grief at the end of this conversation. And I know that's a big ask, but I'm putting it on the table.
I guess I didn't communicate my downer at the beginning. I was trying to come from that place, but I guess I didn't. And I was aware of the desire, the natural desire to end on a more hopeful note, right? It's a natural human desire. And yet I hear you, Lydia, not wanting to patch over the wound. So just to say that I hear you. I also hear those of you who want to have hope, that hope is important. I personally have issues with hope. Seriously, I prefer faith to hope, but but the greatest is love, of course. As long as we have love, then I don't need hope. But it's a longer conversation. So I just hope in that sense that that you do feel met by us. That we're not really trying to patch it over, but we are trying to, in our own way, not leave everybody in pieces, I guess.
I think, I don't want to be misunderstood. I'm not expressing hopelessness. I'm expressing, whether it's tonight or maybe I just need to read a good article that you already know about, in the same way that the great unraveling sharpens the great turning, can the conversation about AI sharpen and actually give birth to better collective, moral, caretaking ways among us? That's hopeful to me, actually. And the grief is the arrow towards that. So it's not a hopeless grief. It's simply an intelligent grief, I think.
Can we have a bit of rage too?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I say? And yeah, I want to piggyback on that. I think this is like a really important point, and it kind of relates to the question of the aura. And like, I think that, you know, with all this new AI generated art, there's going to be all these desires for like real, well, not real, that's an open question, but like things that people like made out of their love and care and like time and with their hands and things like that. And I think, you know, AI can't stop me from saying like, right, that's a habit I have to, I have to do on my own. And I think that the moral sentiments that are at the heart of, well, at opening our hearts and things like that, like AI doesn't have any, well, I wanted to ask Chad actually that question earlier, like, can AI open our hearts in some way? But I don't know how it can at this point, other than translating text that help us do that or something like that. But I think it points to the need for real connection and that kind of concrete aspect, both in art and in moral and community. So I think it's an opportunity to come to that.
Let's give it to Sarah. Lisa.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Jake, because when I was hearing you speak, and thank you for sharing your grief with us, I thought of really powerful connections. So, you know, I mentioned like fan fiction, and you write for others, and you make these community relationships. And I was thinking, one of the most powerful connections for me, so disclaimer, I'm not a Hubs fan. I have a problem with the social contract. And at the time, I had to do this like really intense project for somebody who was very pro-Hobbes. And so I was doing all this reading, and I came across Charles Mill's The Racial Contract, who criticizes understanding the idea of coming from this Eurocentered social contract as if it was completely neutral, that ideas of colonialism and slavery weren't embedded somehow into the contract. And I went out immediately and I bought his book, and I read it, and I cried, and it meant so much to me that I actually sent him an email before we died. And I mean, looking back, it's just kind of amazing that he responded, because he did. And every time I move an institution, I forward that email because it just meant, sorry, it just meant so much to me, because he told me, like, you are not alone. Those were like his first words to me. These things you were experiencing, these things that you were feeling, I too have experienced that. And I think there's something really powerful in that. And you mentioned the need for like community building and collaboration. And we saw a lot of that through the pandemic, so mutual aid, mutual support. But we see that around the world. So I'm thinking of Zapatistas and Chiapas who are still fighting, who are still like resisting and community building. And I think that this is part of that movement of community building, of resisting. So everywhere you will find communities that are they're placing value on our relationships, that we build and we maintain through our ideas of co-learning, co-teaching, co-creating, co-thinking, and keeping those things sacred are going to allow us to fight the tide that AI may be a part of, and maybe even some ways driving it, but there are larger systems that are driving the need to use AI technologies in certain ways. And so you ask for hope. And so when I think of hope, I think of people. I think of the type of meaning that it comes from being a person and having experiences and sharing those experiences. And so whenever I become really hopeless, I reach out to the people around me. And I think during our talks today, echoed throughout many of the talks today, that thought keeps getting reaffirmed. So those are my thoughts.
Just a brief thing. AI is not going to solve any of our problems. And I think one of the reasons that we need to be critical of this kind of transhumanist technological progressivism, that there's a deterministic curve to the course of technological evolution that's just going to make things better and better and better. That's a delusion. Technology does not solve problems, it creates problems. There's no technology that solves a problem. At least no technology that solves a problem without, creating a dozen more, right? And so the sorts of ethical the injustices that currently prevent the human being and human society from, equitably distributing food and housing and education and healthcare. That's a human problem, and the machines are never going to help us with that. We already have the technology we would need to do a very good job feeding and clothing and housing and educating and et cetera for everybody.
Matt, sorry, can I?
And then we'll get to Kate.
It's not going to help us, but the evil forces are using it to help themselves. So unless
I'm not saying we shouldn't use it. I'm just saying it doesn't solve these problems.
Oh, no.
And it
No,
also
right.
distracts us. It's distracting us from solving those problems right now.
Potentially.
Well, who's the us? As you know, there's I don't know who the us is, but
Kate she has. Oh, you're good.
I have a question about identity, and I know in the PCC we talk a lot about the idea of the self and the modern view of the self and the way that has taken its shape today. And going back to what Becca was saying about the origins of the internet being under the Uranus Neptune, and there being a sense of potential boundarylessness in a positive way for this idea of the self, and then along the lines of maybe a dismantling of identity as it relates to ownership. As Jack was saying, whose idea was it, and his going back and forth, that there could be potential co-collaborations, not only with technology, but with each other, where we have a less solid sense of atomization. I just wondered if anyone had thoughts on identity as it relates to this.
Not
This provokes me, your comment provoked me to tie a couple ideas together, so I don't know if it will respond directly, but to connect Ari's comment and Matt's and yours and Becca's. I think one implicit question that's alive here right now is, where do ideas come from? And so if we have an idea of authority, the author creates the ideas, then it definitely seems like it disrupts that a lot, and we've raised some questions about authority of text and scholarly, and what that means for writers. But we've also heard ideas about that ideas pass through the author, right? And that they come from the realm of forms or the imaginal or the diamond or what have you, the universe, God's spirit. So what I was thinking about your question was just, what is the source of ideas as conduits in which we will have to, I think, deepen the ability to be conduits for for those ideas, and open those channels, because that's one of the things that living beings can do that machines can't. And I said living beings purposefully. I don't mean humans. But if we believe that I am the author, the source of authority, and only I create ideas, then ChatGPT totally disrupts that, right? So I think that on the one hand, we can enhance our human and mammalian and living being identities as conduits of ideas that can be novel. We can deepen into that identity, and on the other hand, perhaps move away from the individualistic and atomistic ownership of the creative ideas, which probably doesn't make sense.
Anyone else want to say something to that?
Say something brief.
We'll wrap in a second. Thanks for staying a little bit longer with us. We'll bring this to a conclusion shortly.
Every experience I've had of an idea that I would say comes to me and feels really potent, transformative, it doesn't feel like mine. And I also feel the immediate desire to share it. And so in terms of identity, I mean, that's why I'm less attached to the idea that only human beings can write interesting things. Just because of that experience that continually occurs when genius strikes. That's not my genius. It's the genius of the cosmos. It's the genius of language. It's the genius of, this matrix of intelligence that we are bathed in, And so artificial intelligence and these machine learning technologies are just making that insight about the nature of ideas more. And I think it's a potentiality that will us collectively of how we participate in intelligence, and that it's not something I have or you have. But it's a difficult paradigm to break out of, because we're being really strongly encouraged to keep thinking about it in terms of the old paradigm of intellectual rights, which, I even find I do still not want plagiarism to happen, but at the same time, I don't claim to own the good ideas that I've shared,
I mean, I would just add that, Descartes got his ideas for the universal mathematics in a dream, and he wrestles with the question of
authors are plagiarists. He was also an opium addict, so take that. Coleridge.
Oh.
I think when it comes to identity and ideas, for me, the most important question is, who do you become, right? Our identity isn't something that you're born with, like a little precious thing that you have, you got to figure out what it is. It's actually, you're being shaped your whole life, being transformed through thinking, through relating, through loving, through grieving. And so the single most important question human beings can ask them in their lives, in our individual lives, is what kind of human being will I become? That is actually pretty close to the motto for PCC when we talk about reimagining the human being as a mutually enhancing member of the Earth community. And I think the advent of these new forms of artificial intelligence and the large language models that go along with them, and all the things that are going to come in the next 5 years and the 5 years after that, hopefully, all of these make that question even more important. We have to be asking ourselves, what are humans for? Who will we become? And why is that important, right? That we become it all. I think that's where the identity question lands for me in relationship to this.
That's a wrap.
Thanks everyone listening online.
Yeah, I know.